Hi, I'm Jason Gorber for ThatShelf.com, and we're here to talk about Norah Jones.
That shelf.
So, just to make me feel old, this came out 20 goddamn years ago. Norah Jones, Come Away With Me, was a very successful record. It felt absolutely ubiquitous when it came at the time. I think that people were just desperate for something that sounded a little bit organic, a little bit acoustic. I mean, we had just come out of a time where certainly music was either becoming incredibly polished and incredible pop, a continuation of the 80s stuff when we're getting a ton of boy bands, or we're getting sort of very chunky, a neo-punk version of the stuff, either in terms of pop punk or even before that, things like that Nirvana kid, and the whole grunge scene. So when this sucker came out, it felt like not easy jazz, not in the sense of easy listening, but certainly something that had a jazz aesthetic in terms of beautiful instrumentation, gorgeous playing. I mean, it shows up on BlueNote, the immortal jazz label. So somebody with the timbre and the care of a classic jazz singer, but the instrumentation, the musicality of almost indie pop, and so she really sort of captured a moment that people were very anxious to get. It's a super chill record. It's like a sitting down and relaxing record, but it's also a beautiful and intense record if you actually dive into it. And in a funny way, I think its popularity actually, in a weird way, hurt it. If that makes any sense. This was obviously a debut album, completely tied to the legacy of BlueNote and everything that it represented, but also what she represents. Because once we realized that she was Ravi Shankar's daughter, and that there was this sort of this connection to just musical, titanic musical legacy. And yet she was very much obviously finding her own path, very different than a father with whom she had sort of a complicated connection with. It was very interesting to actually see how it all played out. Now, this is the 20th anniversary box set, which will open up, but I haven't owned this on vinyl ever, because I had this. This is the Super Audio CD 5.1 mix of this record that I've had basically since it came out. Look, I mean, Bill Frisell and Brian Blade. And it's Blade, not Blade. It gets complicated. But yeah, Brian Blade, Bill Frisell, and then some other people, obviously Lee Alexander, Kenny Wolfson, some fantastic players on here. But what's beautiful about this particular version is that it is, and as it sort of says here, is this is a multi-channel Super Audio CD. So this is sort of came out at that time where they're really caring about multi-channel mixes and doing incredibly good ones. And so if I listen to that record, I traditionally would listen to this. It is not an obnoxious 5.1 mix. It's actually a really cool, warm one. It makes it feel like she and the band are in the room playing for you. Now, when we talk about the ubiquity of this, it went from being this sort of indie darling, this sort of discovery on a major label, like the chance that they were taking on something, a post-Cassandra Wilson world. Not post, but certainly après Cassandra Wilson, in the sense that they were finding another voice to actually highlight. And then it just became every goddamn coffee shop you walked into, you would hear this over and over again, especially the title track. You became inundated. And in some ways, like some of the greatest records, its popularity ended up ebbing one's appreciation for it. So I think that this anniversary is a perfectly good time for us to remember this is a pretty goddamn remarkable album. And the story of it is really interesting because, like so many records, some of the great records, various positions, the Leonard Cohen record that was rejected by the studio. The first time that they actually went in the studio and recorded a bunch of the stuff, the people at Blue Note just rejected it outright. And she had to go back with a different producer, Arf Martin, and recraft. Now, some of those songs ended up being on the original album, slightly tweaked and remixed. This was her first time doing it, so she ended up dropping the original producer, working with a monster giant producer, and Arif Mardin, and sort of moving for there. Now, Sir Jay Newland, the original producer, still has some tracks involved in the original, and it's with Jay Newland that she actually did something that I think is pretty great, which is to revisit not only the demos, which we normally get, but also those original recordings, and to hear the difference between them. Now, I've had a chance to listen to some of these on streaming, and that's what really prompted me to get this. I'm like, what, do I really need this? Do I need this on vinyl? First of all, my understanding is that the pressing is really phenomenal, but second of all, it's for this extra stuff. I mean, you can see that there's a gazillion things on here. So we have, obviously, the Come Away With Me 20th Anniversary Master, great. We have the demos, the first session outtakes, tabla versions, I mean, obviously, in part, a connection to our ancestry. And then the first sessions EP. So the original sessions that were done and that were done this. 6 demos previously released as the promo-only first sessions EP. And then the Allaire sessions. The Allaire sessions was the original studio where a bunch of that stuff was done. All alternate versions or alternate mixes of what was eventually released on the album. Different time signatures, different instrumentation, or even if it is the same version that showed up here, a completely different mix. These were originally, I believe, all digitally recorded. At that time, I would be very surprised if it was actual analog recordings, any of them. I don't know that for the fact, but that's my guess. But nonetheless, to have something like this on vinyl, yes, it's a fetish object. Yes, I get to watch it on black wax, but I've said it before that my vinyl setup's actually now a little bit better than my digital setup. But there's something, introspective, the fetish of watching, listening to stuff, in this format is certainly a way to go. So let's crack it open and see what the box looks like inside. The other thing is, and again, don't want to make this too much about why bother listening to vinyl, but so often what happens on releases like this is that the mastering engineers in terms of vinyl are worried about some very different things, and those are mastering even for CD now. Usually the CD mix is pretty much the same as the streaming mix, and the streaming mix has to compete with modern productions that amplify almost every signal, compress the hell out of it, and make it super, so that suddenly you're not hearing a super quiet song. It's not quite as egregious as it used to be, but usually, if you think about it, the CD is sort of the consumer base level audio production, the same thing that's going to go to streaming. It's for most major releases, not as much time and care is actually spent on the CD as it is on the vinyl, where they actually try to make the sound as pleasing as possible. Given the limitations of the medium, you actually have to take more care in mastering. So that is one of the things to actually take into consideration about why sometimes the vinyl, even for something digital, sounds a little bit better. Certainly sounds different, which is part of the fun. Now, that being said, what I'm not going to get out of this set is the glorious 5.1 mix. So I am absolutely unafraid to listen to high resolution or 5.1 digital or even a fantastic CD. I'm agnostic when it comes to that kind of format, but there's something to be said for me of personally being able to actually listen to it this way, in this format. If I'm at home listening to it, I'll probably listen on vinyl. Otherwise, I'll listen to it on streaming. So here we are. Inside the box is a very nice, robust book. I really love how they did this as a sort of old school album photo of her. And inside here, you can see that as it flips out, you have each individual thing in here. So it's like one of these old school albums. This is why they called them albums back in the 78 days, that each one has its sort of own slot in here. As I open this up, inside the first flap is a book. Again, promo shots, essays, the usual wonderful stuff you get in collected materials like this. Old school track breakdowns, photos of her being preposterously young and preposterously talented, lyrics, and then the credits at the end. So a nice little book that sort of slides in to the front portion here, so it sort of slides in behind her face here on the front. And each record, let's see how they're actually put in here. They're actually top loading. So they are, thank God, not in pure paper sleeves, but in poly-lined paper sleeves. Now I will be replacing these because I'm neurotic with my Vinyl Storage Solutions 3mm stuff, but nonetheless, there we are. Ye old black vinyl. They're all going to look very similar. Looks nice and clean. I see no obvious blemishes. And simply the way that it's actually there. Do I recognize any of these initials? I probably should, but I'm not so good. I know it's pressed at Sterling, or at least mastered at Sterling, plated at Sterling. There we are. Nonetheless, so there we are. It is a 4-record set, so there is 1 record to go. And inside here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, the same, pulling out the same sleeve there. So that is a very quick look at the packaging, absolutely lovely packaging of Ms. Jones's debut. I really, really like this record, and I really am going to enjoy diving into some of the tracks that, again, even those that were overplayed, I look forward to listening to them with a little bit clearer ears. But as something similar, as fascinating as Cold Cold Heart, which she covers here, the way she does it is so remarkable. I mean, we sort of take for granted of her taking this like song from the 30s, essentially, and twisting it into her own idiom. There's a musical bravery here that I think has been underplayed since that time, and absolutely paved the way for so many artists that took this sort of neo-Americana sound and actually sort of ran with it. It's very easy to see the effect that this had on generations of singer-songwriters. Not all of whom had quite the success that she had financially with this record, but in a funny way, Norah Jones has never really been able to live up to what this record was. I think some of her other albums and performances are really fantastic, but she hasn't really sort of fit into the cultural zeitgeist in a way that she did then. It was so dramatic about how impactful that record was at the time. As I said, in a sort of a funny way, I think it's overwhelmed. In some ways, the talent of the record is that the popularity sort of overshot what took place. Now here we are 2 decades later with a perfect opportunity to do a proper anniversary set that allows us to not only witness the sort of working process by which this album was actually created, but also to celebrate those aspects sort of away from the spotlight of popularity, of intense popularity, contemporary popularity, and just recognize about how even 2 decades on, this album continues to resonate, and I think will for many decades to come. For ThatShelf.com, I'm Jason Gorber. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks for watching. Look forward to digging in and listening to some Norah. Please let us know in the comments what you think. Subscribe, follow us on social media, and we'll see you next video. All the best. Take care.